This video is video 2 in a two-part introduction to this series about improving your diet. The series is based upon the lessons I learned while transforming myself in my mid-40s from being a fussy eater with a very poor diet to someone with a healthy diet derived from a much broader selection of foods, with more of those foods being non-processed whole foods. And now I'm just going to tell you some of the things that this series will be about, some of the topics that I'm going to make videos about, so you can see if any of them are things that might be of interest to you. So as I said, I was a fussy eater for many years, and it was very psychological. It was only recently that I realised just how psychological it was and just how I was mentally blocked, even when I was a grown-up and I knew that it was a good idea to have a better diet and to eat more food. I just couldn't shake off some of those things, and it's only in recent times that I've been able to look back at that with my improved diet and understand that this was a really strong psychological thing. You know, I couldn't fix it by just willing myself to eat better food and to try new foods. There was a serious blockage in there that came from childhood and experiences that I had, and I found a way to overcome it, but I didn't realise all my life just how deeply embedded this was to things like traumatic experiences, and how issues with my anxiety and my nervous system were tied in with this problem with eating. And it's a bit of a self-perpetuating thing, because now I can see that having a better diet is really good for your brain and your body. So if you're having issues with anxiety and things like that, then having a really good diet is probably going to help you to make it easier to fix those things. And having a terrible diet like I did is not going to help. It's going to make those problems worse, and that's what happened to me. So I'm going to be sharing information on how I managed to turn around that fussy eating problem and some of the techniques that I used to do it. So another problem that I solved is that I had a tendency towards processed and convenience food. I didn't know how to cook properly, and I taught myself how to do that. So I'll be sharing ways that you can wean yourself off convenience food and get over the hump of making your own food, and how difficult it feels if you've always been eating convenience food. It's quite challenging to start eating really healthy food and cooking it and preparing it all yourself, because it takes a lot of time and effort, and when you're learning how to do that at the start, you get it wrong a lot of time and you have to throw food in the bin, and that hurts and it's upsetting. So I'm going to be explaining how I did that, how I managed to get to a point now where I, as much as possible, I prepare my own meals, I create my own recipes and put as many whole foods in there as possible, and try and avoid processed food as much as possible. As mentioned, I'm going to be sharing information about how I try and keep control of my weight and how I try to lose weight when I've put on too much. And another issue I had was in my 40s probably, I started having a bloating issue where I think my body got to a point where it just couldn't process bad food anymore, or couldn't process it as well. And I started getting bloating where not only would my stomach bloat, but it comes with a very unpleasant feeling as well, which lasts for quite a few hours. So I had to go into a process of trial and error of trying to find which foods were causing me to bloat so I could cut them out of my diet. And in some ways this was quite helpful, because I didn't want this bloating to come back. So that was one of the things that actually helped me to have a better diet in the long run. But I'll be talking a little bit about bloating and what I learned about the foods that were bloating me. So I'll be talking about some of the things that motivate me to have a better diet, and they are because I want to be healthier and I want to live a long, healthy life. I also wanted to spend less money, because when you're buying convenience food and processed food, it can get quite expensive. And when you're eating loads of junk outside of your meals, like crisps and sweets and things, they're not cheap, and you end up wasting a lot of money on those things. So one of my motivations was to have a more economical diet. And obviously, as mentioned, you know, being really into fitness and strength training, another motivator was that I wanted to understand what good nutrition was. I wanted to be able to experience it so that I could see if it helped me to gain muscle in my 50s, for example, and did it make it easier to lose weight if I was having a healthier diet, all these kind of things. And as I briefly touched upon earlier, one of the key motivators for me was that I really wanted to give up unhealthy, addictive food, because I was becoming someone who wasn't addicted to anything. And I was offended by the fact that I realised that people were spiking my food with things that made me become addicted to it. And even though when I ate it, my body was going, this isn't great, you know, why are you eating this? You know, I would eat a really big bag of crisps and feel ill for a few hours, but I would do that on a regular basis. I would, 2 days later, I'd forget that I felt ill the last time I ate them, and I'd go and buy some more, because I was addicted to those foods, because the scientists were putting chemicals in there that were firing off chemicals in my brain when I ate it, and that was how I was becoming addicted to it. So I really, really wanted to win that battle. And I did eventually. So this is something I'm going to talk about in future videos. So just finally to mention some of the things that I've been doing with my diet. I mentioned that I'd looked into fasting and I'd tried different kinds of fasting. So one of the ones that I've stuck with is, it's kind of along the lines of what they call the 16-8, which is where I try to aim to have an eating window in the day where I eat for 8 hours, and then I have 16 hours where I don't eat anything at all. So I'm just fasting in those 16 hours. And what I also try and do is I try and expand that 16 hours as much as I can and try and squeeze that 8 hours of eating. So the idea behind it is that you squeeze your eating window and make it as small as possible, and you expand your fasting window, because you do this on the basis that ideally what's happening is that when you're fasting, your body is having a chance to repair itself, because it's digested the food that you've eaten and it's done that job, it's finished. So it's kind of like inside your body, it's saying to itself, well, what do I do next? I've finished digesting all this food, I've got 16 hours to go or 10 hours to go. I know, let's repair this body, let's fix this, let's fix that. That's the theory behind fasting, is that if you do it on a daily basis, then you give your body the best chance of repairing itself. So I try and squeeze the eating window, and I try and expand the fasting window as much as I can. I track that daily. I track which time I open the window, and I track which time I close it. I just write it in a text file on my computer, and that helps me to be aware of it, to notice if it's going the wrong way or the right way. And what I try and do is I try and leave it as long as possible before I eat in the morning. And more importantly, what I do is I try and make sure that I close my eating window as long before my bedtime as possible. So I definitely want to have 3 hours at least before I go to bed where I've already fasted. So ideally I'm not doing too much digesting of my food while I'm asleep. Hopefully it's all done by the time I get to bed. So the key thing is to try and get that window closed after I have my dinner, close it, and then just drink water or drink sort of herbal tea, not tea with milk in it, so that I'm fasting, just liquids basically, after I've closed the window. Another thing that I do with my food, which came from books, because fasting, I read a book on fasting and that was really helpful, but another thing that came from a book was I read a book called The Glucose Revolution, and the whole book basically is about trying to reduce the amount of glucose spikes that you have throughout the day, and trying to reduce the height of those spikes. If you plot them on a graph, you try and stop them, you try and make them lower. So if you do have a glucose spike because you've eaten something with sugar in it, the spike isn't as high, because the theory is that glucose spikes are damaging for you, and that they have effects as well. That if you have a large glucose spike, then it can cause you to change to eat bad food. You know, you're more likely to eat bad food after that spike, because you have this kind of dip and then this raise again that makes you desire the wrong kind of food with sugar in it, basically. So I read this book and it had a lot of different information in it, and I really liked what was in it. And one of the things I took from it was that the lady who wrote the book, she claims that one of the ways to make your body healthier is to eat food in a certain order, and that order is that you have fibre first, then I think it's fat and protein second, and then your carbohydrates last. And one of the theories behind this is that when you have fibre first, it does something in your stomach. And so when you then eat the protein and the fats and then the carbs, it changes how you process that. So it lowers the amount of the glucose spike that you have. It's quite technical and I'm not explaining it very well, but just go with this, that it's good to eat fibre first, and then ideally have 5 or 10 minutes before you have anything else. And Ideally, you would do this with every meal, and I find that quite difficult. But the main one that I do is I made it so that I have fibre as the first thing I eat each day. So when I'm breaking my fast with breakfast, it's fibre. So in terms of fibre, what I have is a big plate of salad. I have celery, cucumber, radish, lettuce, and other kinds of fibre. And then typically I would have porridge as my next meal, porridge with some fruit in it. So there's a fair bit of glucose and sugar in the fruit, and there's a lot of carbs in the oats I'm having in my porridge. So the idea is that I give myself a nice base of fibre and let that settle in for 20 minutes or something, half an hour, and then have my porridge afterwards. And according to the book, according to the theories in there, that's a good way of doing this. And it's something I've stuck with, and it's something I like. It takes a bit of extra work preparing this fibre. I can't do it every single day, you know, it depends where I am and what food I've got. But it's something I've stuck with, and I'll be explaining more about that in my video series. Something else that I've tried and I use on and off is there's a website called MyFitnessPal, and you can load up that website with the kind of meals that you typically eat, and it basically tracks your macros, and primarily it tells you how many calories you're eating. And what I found with that website is when I'm struggling, when I'm overeating, when I'm putting on weight, if I start using it and tracking everything I eat, it keeps me really accountable because I can see the calories. And by inputting all the foods that I eat, I learnt a lot about which foods are more calorific than others. I was deluding myself with some of them. I didn't realise how many calories some foods have. So I would tell myself, hey, it's okay to eat this, it's quite healthy and it's not really calorific, and it actually was. So by using that website, it was very educational. It helped me a lot to understand where I had to cut down on certain ingredients in my food, or certain foods cut down completely. And it made me accountable. If I want, you know, you set a daily calorie amount that you want to stick to, and by logging everything, you can see as you get closer to that limit, and it keeps you accountable. So I don't use it all the time. I tend to use it when I need to try and lose some weight, when I need to, if bad habits have been creeping in, if I've been eating too much, then I start using it and tracking everything. And I usually do that for about 3 or 4 weeks, and I get bored of doing it. It takes quite a bit of time. And then by that time, usually I've started to get it under control again. So then I stop using it. For some people, maybe it's a good idea to use it all the time, but it's really useful. And I use the free version of that website. You don't have to pay anything. You just have to take the time to input your food into it. Another thing I've tried to do with my diet is to minimize some of the sort of unhealthier and the kind of foods that cause me to put weight on. So the starchy foods like bread, pasta, try and keep those to a minimum. That's something I've been experimenting with at different times. I have tried with pasta, for example, for exchanging it for courgette, which is like using courgettes in a spiralizer. I've had that a few times, and that's quite interesting. And I also bought different types of pasta that wasn't made from wheat. It didn't taste very nice, but I tested those things out, and I'll be talking about those kind of things. I've been trying to eat more whole foods as much as possible, trying to cut out nearly all ultra-processed foods and processed food as much as I can. I've tried to cut out all fast food from takeaway restaurants, that kind of thing, and it's taken me quite some time and a lot of effort, and I'm pretty close to eliminating that completely from my diet. As I briefly mentioned earlier, I have completely cut out crisps and sweets from my diet now. That took a lot of effort, and I'll be explaining more about the crisp one a lot in some different videos, because that was a real challenge for me, and I've won that one. I do allow myself some chocolate. I have just quite cheap dark chocolate bars, and just occasionally allow myself to have like 1 or 2 squares of that, just as a little treat, because it's not that unhealthy. And that's the only sort of snack thing that I've kept in my diet now. I don't have any sweets at all. One of the challenges I had is when I go out for the day with my girlfriend, we go driving out in the car to nice places and things, and I developed a bad habit of eating really bad food when I was out in the car. And it's taken some time, but I've been altering that. I've been changing what we eat. We would sometimes buy meal deals from supermarkets and things like that. And it's just about looking at the packet and just thinking about things and just switching them out slightly for better items, and also taking food with me packing food in little Tupperware boxes in a little ice bag and things like that. These make a big difference. They can save money and they're much, much healthier. So I've been trying to do things like that. So all of these things have been going on pretty much at the same time over a period of years now, where I've been playing around with these things, experimenting with them, seeing what I can learn. And I'm going to share all the things I've learned, all the successes I've had in this video series. But there's been quite a lot going on at the same time to do with my diet. And yeah, I've got a lot to share. So I hope that explains what this is about. I haven't explained it that well, but I've tried my best. But I hope you might come and have a look at some of these videos in this series. Thanks for watching.